Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today we have a very special interview with Rabbi Daniel Lapin, who's affectionately known as America's Rabbi. In this program today we'll be discussing the significance and the importance of Jewish-Christian relations in defense of our Judean-Christian heritage. We'll also be discussing the US presidential elections and asking, is America at a crossroads, particularly in terms of her foreign policy towards Israel and the Middle East? And we'll also be discussing the rise of anti-Semitism and what Christians can do to stand by Israel and the Jewish people. Rabbi Daniel Lapin, it's a great honor and privilege to have a rabbi on the Middle East Report. You're the first rabbi I've ever interviewed, so I feel very privileged.
That's very kind of you. I'm delighted to be with you. I really am. It's my first television interview in the United Kingdom on the Strip.
Fantastic. And Rabbi, can I ask you a little bit about your history and your background? You come from a very prominent family. I know that you come from South Africa originally, but you're also now affectionately known as America's Rabbi. Can you tell us a little bit about your family background and how you became such a prominent rabbi in the United States?
Well, the family background is a rabbinic background, which is both a blessing and a curse, because whenever I speak in public, I imagine with extremely realistic vividness that some of my rabbinic forebears are standing behind me evaluating my performance, and generally they look very disapproving, so that worries me a great deal, but it also comes with the blessing of wonderful oral transmissions of scripture and meaning. And I arrived in the United States of America for just a 3-week visit, but an extraordinary thing happened, Simon, and that is that I figured I'd just rent a car, take the Grand Canyon, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and then I'm out of there. I was on my way to Israel. But an extraordinary thing happened while I was preparing my trip. I discovered that I was going to be driving through a town called Salem in the state of Kentucky. And I thought to myself, well, that's a coincidence. I mean, Salem is the old scriptural name for Jerusalem. Melchizedek was, of course, the high priest and the king of Salem. And I thought, well, that's a little odd. And then I started looking around, and I saw like there are 19 other Salems. And then I saw Bethlehems and Hebrons. And this is weird. I mean, this country I'd never been in before is absolutely filled with biblical place names. And that began my love affair with the United States of America and how I became very active in Jewish-Christian relationships there.
Yeah, and can you talk about the importance of Jewish-Christian relations? Because I think over the last 10 years, there's certainly been a renaissance in terms of closeness between Christians and Jews. I mean, to have an interview here in Britain with a rabbi and the Jewish community really reaching out to the Christian community would be even unheard of even 10 years ago. Why do you think we're seeing the Jewish community really reaching out to the Christian community and that wall of enmity and division really breaking down?
I think that to some extent, we can give credit to our Muslim brethren for help in this particular area, and I'll tell you why. There seems to be a very long memory on the Islamic side of the picture. I know that to Islamic historians, the siege of Vienna in 1683, when Christian knights held the city against the Ottoman invaders, that's like yesterday. And, whether it was the Battle of Lepanto and the defeat of the Islamic fleet late in the 16th century, these are things that are still alive in the Muslim memory, whereas I think both Jews and Christians tend to be much shorter term oriented. And so what's happened is that for the first time, I think thoughtful people are aware that Western civilization is in a fight for its own survival against two foes. One is the foe of Islamic fundamentalism, but there's another foe as well, and that's an internal foe of what I call secular fundamentalism, which undermines Western civilization by its attack on its religious roots and renders it not only less capable but even less willing to defend itself in terms of seeing anything of value in its own durability and survival. And so all of a sudden, many Jews and Christians are saying to themselves, wait a moment, this in certain global terms, this is a struggle between the culture of the Quran and the twin civilizations that sprang from the Bible. And it's brought it into very sharp relief. And we realize that, as Benjamin Franklin said, if we don't hang together, we most assuredly will hang separately.
Yeah, and if we look at some of the crises that not only Britain faces, not only Europe face, but also the United States face, I mean, we are probably facing the worst economic situation that we've faced since the 1930s. And certainly if the euro goes down, this could plunge the world into a depression. We've got the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood throughout the Arab Spring and the Arab world. We're seeing the emergence of China, and we're seeing a loss of American power and influence in the world. And at the same time, we see a fundamental attack on Christianity and on Judaism and on Judean Christian heritage. And that makes me think that the one reason why I believe that Britain and the United States won World War II and defeated the tyranny of the Nazis was primarily because of the belief system in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in our Judean Christian heritage. We don't have that anymore. How precarious do you believe Western civilization is at the moment, since they've turned their back on our unique heritage?
Simon, that's so interesting that you should phrase the question that way, because I almost have the feeling that we must have collaborated on the preparation of this interview, and we didn't, of course. But I agree very strongly with what you said. It's always been my conviction that, for instance, economic performance is very strongly linked to a fundamental belief system. It's not an accident that economics is called the dismal science, because it doesn't respond to a merely quantifying kind of analysis. Econometrics are extremely difficult to make dependable, because so much of economic performance depends upon moral character. For instance, it's something that has been established in the United States of America. I'm not familiar with corresponding figures in the United Kingdom, but in the United States, net worth, when factored out for people's age and income, net worth is linked to church affiliation. In other words, people with a strong religious relationship and a connection with God tend to save more and invest more rather than spend and consume. And so we find that's just one very obvious way in which belief contributes enormously to economic outcome. And so similarly, on a macro level within a society and within a nation, the collapse of Judeo-Christian culture, both in the United Kingdom and certainly its decline in the United States, is not disconnected from the economic decline. And obviously, economic decline is a harbinger of military decline. You cannot project military might without economic might, and that's something that the current administration in the United States of America would appear to be quite oblivious of.
And really, when I look at Britain's historical record towards the Jewish people, and it's a mixed. I would describe it as a mixed blessing. Sadly, we had Edward the Confessor in 1290. He expelled the Jewish community from Britain, only for Oliver Cromwell in 1656 to allow the Jewish people to return. And yet, when we look at American history, particularly since the American Revolution, when George Washington was the first president of the United States, Jewish people were accepted as part of the cabinet and welcomed on part of American society. Do you believe that is the fundamental reason why America's been so blessed and so successful over the last couple of centuries?
Look, I do think Genesis is absolutely reliable on this. I will bless those that bless them, and those that curse them I will curse. I think that is extraordinarily reliable. But I think what's more interesting is the mechanism by means of which that promise of God finds fulfillment. We certainly saw it in Spain, the expulsion of Spain. The expulsion of Jews from Spain corresponded to an economic decline. The expulsion of Jews from England in the 13th century, as you point out, is described in very poignant terms by Winston Churchill in his History of the English-speaking Peoples, where he writes of the fact that over the years, many of the mortgages of the landed gentry in England were held by Jews. And they suddenly realized that a way to free themselves of their financial obligations would be to expel the Jews. And Churchill writes that with shocking imprudence, is the phrase he uses, Jews allowed themselves to be put in this position of where their expulsion was almost inevitable. And of course, it was until Oliver Cromwell, who only because of his biblical commitment saw fit to bring the Jews back. And again, that corresponded with a rise in England's financial fortunes. So, we can't ignore the fact that Jews are disproportionately good with money and have always been positive and a benevolent influence on the financial fortunes of their host country. The prominence of Jews in America cannot be separated from America's economic power and economic might. And I think we see the same thing in Israel. Can we touch on that for a moment?
Absolutely.
Well, this is the thing that's so interesting, and I'm sure these are things that have intrigued you as they do me, Simon. And that is that, in the United States of America, if you look at a state like Georgia, Georgia has about 10 times the population of a state like Rhode Island. And not surprisingly, its gross domestic product, the whole economic output of the state of Georgia, is 10 times that of Rhode Island. Generally speaking, gross domestic product is a function of population. Germany was able to fight pretty effectively 2 world wars, largely because its population was bigger than any other country in Europe. Productivity was therefore in aggregate that much higher. Well, here's the funny thing. Israel's 4 contiguous neighbors, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, have 10 times the population of Israel. So you would expect the GDP of those countries in aggregate to be about 10 times the economic output of Israel. As a matter of fact, with 1/10 of the population, Israel produces exactly the same economic output as all of those countries combined, which means that on average per capita, every Israeli is 10 times more productive economically than citizens of those 4 countries. These are real economic features that have to be taken into account in understanding political prognostications and military projections as well.
So would you say, going on from what you've just said then, would you go on and say that probably the current economic situation that the West faces, particularly in the United States and in Europe, and also here in Britain, everyone's suffering due to the austerity cuts, has that a direct spiritual relation to which these nations are treating the Jewish people in Israel?
Well, it's not only, yes, it's treating the Jewish people in Israel, but it's also abandoning the principles of the covenant. What a lot of people don't realize is that the British Empire spread not only because of a quest for foreign treasure. It was largely, this is true. The British Empire was driven by a zeal to spread the gospel. That was what it was. And the might of the British Empire, which is the largest empire the world has ever known, is a direct function of the fact that England was a biblically religious nation, and their entire understanding of how the world works and how to build a nation sprang from the Bible. Europe used to be a biblically based nation. It is not an accident that in 1450, when Johann Gutenberg invented the printing press, the first book he published was not the Vienna Telephone Directory. It was the Bible.
Yes.
Europe has abandoned that. This is amazing to me that they are still struggling to put together a European constitution. I think it's at about 1,000 pages so far. The word God does not appear once. There is no reference to Christianity. There is no reference to the Bible. So here you've got a Europe that literally sprang into existence out of the pages of God's message to mankind, and today they can't figure out what their link is to the transcendent truths of the past. I think the future for the Union is bleak. I've always said that.
And also, is this coincides with the rise of anti-Semitism across
Sure, it's
Europe.
inevitable.
Because, I mean, in France at the moment, the Jewish community are very, very afraid. We've seen attacks, just a horrendous attack in March on the school in Toulouse, Jewish school, in which a rabbi was killed, his son and another school children were killed. There's been grenade attacks in the Jewish area of Paris. We're seeing that the Jewish community in Brussels is also very, very fearful, plus other Jewish communities in Hungary and other places throughout Europe are scared. It's almost as if Europe is actually repeating the mistakes it made in the 1930s and 40s. And we're seeing a rise of anti-Semitism without governments or without the police really stamping down on this. What do you think this underlying cause is?
This may be controversial, and I certainly wouldn't want to ruffle any feathers because
You're welcome to on this program. Very welcome to.
I had a feeling that you're well practiced in that. But look, I think it's necessary for us to acknowledge that the natural human condition is cowardice. The natural human condition is running from fear. It's a very unnatural and remarkable time when humans exhibit courage. And I believe that courage flows from connection with God. When that is stripped away, I believe the consequence, secularism, engenders a cowardice in the culture. And it then gets recast in mock noble terms like peace and multiculturalism and acceptance. All of these are ways to try and ennoble what is essentially a very ignoble cowardice, an unwillingness to defend one's culture and an unwillingness to see a validity in one's own existence. And so essentially what we have now in a secularized Europe is nobody with the courage to slap a Muslim wrist. And so I think everybody knows that whether it's Paris or Lyon or many of the other cities in Europe, there are parts of these cities that the police simply won't enter. They are simply unable and incapable of overcoming their fear and cowardice to enter and deal with these things. So one of the differences between the way Islam and Christianity have developed is that Christianity has emerged as a peace-loving, essentially the image of Jesus as a man of peace. Islam is a violent faith, and cowards are frightened of violence. And this is one of the most disturbing characteristics of Europe right now, in the sense that when there is a group of people that are willing to deploy violence and nobody else has the courage to face up to that, the prospect is not good, and Jews do not do well in that environment.
And is the situation different in the United States? Because one thing I've always found, particularly here in Britain, is that usually the United States is 10 years behind some of the legislation program, and certainly since the Labour government came to power in '97, right up until even the present day with the current coalition, it seems that to me there's been a fundamental assault on our Judean-Christian heritage, with legislation trying to legislate God out of the public square, as it were. Is that same process happening in the United States with President Obama?
Yes, it is. And the only thing is that it's more of an uphill battle, because there is still an extremely vibrant Christianity in the United States. Look, it's a very significant figure that more Americans attend church on a weekly basis than attend the movie theater on a weekly basis. That's an extraordinary significant number. And so there's a little bit more of a challenge confronting the march of secularism in the United States. Things are a little bit different there also because traditionally the economic escalator has been much more reliable in the United States of America. And so we do not have that seething, discontented, poverty-stricken Islamic population that France has and that even parts of the United Kingdom have today. Although America's Muslim population is about 2 million and growing very, very rapidly, It's a population which is on the middle class escalator, and that means that the fodder for discontent and for sabotage is a little harder to come by. I'm not sanguine about it by any means, but I do think, particularly depending on the outcome of the soon to be run American election, there is some grounds for optimism still in the United States.
And talking about the US presidential elections, do you believe that America is at crossroads? And how significant do you believe these elections are for the future of America and certainly American leadership in the Western world?
You know, I'm as scared of cliches on television as you are. And how many times have we heard people say, "This is the most significant election of our lifetime"? I mean, people say that every single election, right? Excepting this time, it's true.
And yeah, we have really, I mean, when it comes down to American foreign policy, I mean, we have a real stark contrast between President Obama and his challenger, Mitt Romney, from the Republican Party, because the issue of Israel has always been a non-partisan issue. It's been a central pillar of American foreign policy to support Israel and to support the Jewish people. But it's interesting how Israel has actually played a major role in this election by dividing the two candidates, with Mitt Romney accusing his challenger, President Obama, that he's put Israel under a bus. What is the perception of the Jewish community in the United States in terms of the way that President Obama's treated Israel?
Well, you're very well informed, I should say. I was asked recently on an American radio program from here how aware people I talk to in the streets are of American politics, and I had to say almost not at all. And so it's refreshing to talk with you on this. Look. There is no American Jewish community. About the only thing you could get any two American Jews to agree on is that Hitler was a very bad man. But there is not unanimity at all on Israel. In the United States of America, a very large proportion of American Jews are far more deeply committed to the theology of secular fundamentalism than they are to the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I wish I didn't have to say that. As a rabbi, I see it as a personal failure on my part and of my colleagues. But that is a reality. And Obama will still get, in spite of the fact that there is simply no question that he loathes and detests Israel. On a personal level, he loathes and detests Bibi Netanyahu. He is, without question, the architect of the tumult in the Middle East and the so-called Arab Spring. We should all be spared from such springs. This is, I'd like nicer weather than that. And in spite of that, President Obama will get a majority of the Jewish vote. And that's an enormous problem. Look, the clash in America today is not so much between Obama and Romney. It's between a view in which Western civilization and biblical civilization has a role and a place in the world, and a viewpoint of President Obama's, which is that the legacy of the West is evil. It needs to be downplayed, and one of the greatest disservices that Europe ever did to the world was to give Obama the Peace Prize before he'd even taken office as president, because more than anything else it persuaded him that he's not the president of the United States, he's the president of the whole world. And in his view, the world is a better place with a weaker America, a weaker Europe, a downplayed West, and an upplayed third world, including Islam. And much rests on what is going to happen in the United States on November 6th.
So if, for example, President Obama is re-elected for a second term...
God forbid.
Knowing his failure in connection with his Middle Eastern foreign policy, for example, he did nothing to support the Green Movement in Iran.
Shockingly, but
brave demonstrators who demonstrated against the presidential election rigging in Iran, which saw Ahmadinejad come back to power through the help of his Suprema Khomeini. There was silence there for almost a month on that revolution, which could have actually brought down the Islamic Republic of Iran, and that a terrible regime. Plus, also, he did nothing to stand with former allies, such as President Mubarak. We saw that even Colonel Gaddafi had moved into the Western camp under the Bush administration. But it now seems that he's doing everything he can to empower the Muslim Brotherhood to come to power throughout North Africa and the Arab world, which would only be bad news. It would be incredibly bad news for Israel. It would be bad news for minority Muslims, liberals, and also the Christian community. And we've seen how over the last 50 or something years, the ethnic cleansing of the Jewish people from the Arab lands of North Africa, now we're seeing ethnic cleansing of the Christians. Surely this is a fundamental failure on behalf of his Middle East foreign policy.
Without question, it's a calamity. The trouble is, though, that just as there are in the United Kingdom, in the United States, there's a very significant part of the population that agrees with him. And generally speaking, those who are hostile to Israel in America, and there are also hostile to America. In other words, the hostility is not specifically to Israel. The hostility is to the entire vision of Western civilization founded on the Bible, of which Israel and the United States are the prime proponents. And so those hostilities almost inevitably go together on the American university campus. It is difficult to measure whether hostility to Israel or to America is more fervent and intense.
Mm. And what do you think the future of America is if it continues in this direction? Because surely 4 years of President Obama, it's going to be very, very difficult for a Republican president to come in and then try and reverse some of those social reforms and also political and economic reforms that Obama has actually pursued during his presidency.
That's very perceptive of you. You can't turn a large ship around in just a few minutes. It could take decades. With the best will in the world and with true political leadership and a population that is eager and willing, it could take 20 years to bring America back, if ever. I'm not without hope, and I'll tell you why. This may seem odd coming from an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, but I'm not without hope because of the fervent passion of America's evangelical community. Frankly, I think that's the only hope. I think that if there is a decline in American Christianity, it's all over, literally all over.
Which leads me on to a very important question now, I think probably the most important question of the interview so far. From a Jewish perspective, how can we see a Christian revival, not only in the United States, but also in Britain and the West, that's not only going to stand with Israel and the Jewish people, but also then give moral clarity to a world that is in crisis?
And here's where I think that a Jewish-Christian alliance has so much value. Because, if I may say, with all due humility, but I think that Judaism brings something to the table in this alliance, and it brings back just a little bit of the original biblical authenticity, a little bit of that ancient Jewish wisdom, a little bit of those qualities that have enabled Judaism to survive 2,000 years, the majority of which have been tough and oppressive. I do believe that as some of those cultures become infused into Christianity, as we've seen that happen over the last 20 years, as a result of this remarkable moment in history, I think part of what comes from that is a revitalized Christianity, a Christianity with renewed passion and fervor and religious commitment. And the result of that is only good. I'm kind of optimistic about this development.
Mm. And also at a very interesting period in world history, because on the one hand we have the church that is actually coinciding with the establishment of the State of Israel, which I believe is due to biblical prophecy. And what we've seen is the scriptures coming alive, the prophets who God put on their heart to proclaim the re-establishment of the Jewish state in the Middle East is happening in our day. The State of Israel has been a miracle since its foundation on the 14th of May 1948. What role do you believe Christians can have in terms of supporting Israel and the Jewish people, particularly as we see a rise of anti-Semitism across the world?
Well, what I've been so pleased to see on recent visits to Israel is a resetting of Jewish perception of Christian involvement. All of a sudden, Israel is now welcoming the enormous number of Christian pilgrims that visit on a regular basis. A lot of the distrust that was the consequence of the European legacy is vanishing, and this is wonderful news, because I did have to say publicly about 10 years ago in the United States of America, and it caused something of a furor, but nobody disputed the truth of it, which is that in the American scene there is considerably more anti-Christianism among Jews than there is anti-Semitism among Christians, and that needed to be combated. And that's something that that our organization, the American Alliance of Jews and Christians, has been very involved in, along with many other organizations. And thank God there's been wonderful progress there. The distrust has been eroded, and something of the connection so necessary for what I see this to be, a brotherhood of destiny. I mean, literally, I do believe that the future of the world and the future of civilization utterly depends upon the alliance of Jews and Christians, not only against fundamentalist Islam, but an equally threatening and equally frenzied and fanatical foe, namely the world of secular fundamentalism and its utter determination to obliterate religion.
In light of what you've just said, do you believe that Christianity, and I'd like to go a bit further than this and really say that our Judean Christian heritage has actually preserved democracy, it's preserved freedom of speech, it's preserved freedom of assembly, and it's preserved our democracy throughout the Western world. And it very much seems that with a fundamental attack on Christian and Jewish values, what we're seeing now is an alarming intolerance and a move towards authoritarian and totalitarianism.
Absolutely, and again, I couldn't have written your interview question any better than you just did it from my point of view, because I think it's essential that for folks that are watching, you don't have to take my view, or you don't have to react necessarily to the way Simon phrased that question. There's a very simple observation that you have to make which answers his question precisely, and that is to recognize the simple truth that no capital market has ever emerged indigenously in a non-Christian society. Now, there's a stock market today in Singapore and in Accra and in Johannesburg, but these are all imitations of the stock markets that grew up in Amsterdam and in London. Essentially, the emergence of free market capitalism and its existence as the greatest engine for prosperity and freedom and democracy that the world has ever known is strictly a product of the Bible, as Christianity has carried that forward. I mean, that is, unfortunately, for those on the other side, that's unarguable. And so therefore the answer to your question is that the only hope of protecting democracy, protecting Western civilization, protecting the West's economic viability and consequent military capability is a restoration of Judeo-Christian traditions and biblically based culture.
And how can we communicate that to our politicians, those who formulate not only domestic policy but also foreign policy?
The one way that politicians understand, which is defund them, take away their backing, remove them from office and replace them with people who do understand this. Politicians are really easy to work with. They understand.
Very good. And talking about the issue with Israel. Israel is a modern miracle. Without doubt, you can see the divine providence and the divine protection of Israel being able to survive so many years in the Middle East, certainly since the establishment of Israel in 1948, when the world gave Israel no chance. Also in the Six-Day War, the New York Times described this as the end of the Jewish experiment, of the Jewish state, and yet Israel came out on top. And it really leads me to say this situation that surely now Israel is probably more isolated diplomatically in the world and isolated in the Middle East, as we've seen the Arab Spring allow the Muslim Brotherhood to come to power with worrying and frightening consequences.
You know, I've come sadly to a conclusion. I don't like it just because it sounds so chauvinistic, but I think it's true, and that is you can really tell the moral posture of a nation today by its attitude towards Israel. In the current situation in the Middle East, I mean, so, you know, if you flew a helicopter over the Middle East and you just saw the distinction between how the barren desert turns into a fertile wonderland as you fly over the border into Israel, as you look at the freedoms that Arabs enjoy on the streets of Tel Aviv compared to, let alone Jews on the streets of Cairo, how about Christians on the streets of Cairo, that anybody can be willing to contribute to, God forbid, the demise of Israel is an unforgettable indictment on their moral standing. And so I think that we can really think in terms of Israel as a test of where people stand in terms of their moral commitment and in terms of their willingness to defend Western civilization in general. And Europe's abandonment of Israel is baffling and inexplicable to me, were it not for the fact that it corresponds precisely to the secularization of Europe. The secularization of the world is a calamity for Western civilization, it's a calamity for economic independence, and it's a calamity for Israel.
And if we take Israel's situation, I mean, here we are, that Israel's former allies, even though there was a cold peace with Egypt, Israel's border with Egypt was very, very secure until now, since President Morsi won the elections, the free elections in Egypt. Now that is Israel's most precarious border. Israel's closest relationship in the Arab world is with Jordan, and we're seeing that the King Abdullah of Jordan the relationship can only be described as frosty at the moment. And there is also fear that if, for example, President Assad in Syria is overthrown, the Muslim Brotherhood will come to power in Syria, which will then lead to greater internal pressure on the Kingdom of Jordan, which can only mean that Jordan become an Islamic state. Is the West really aware of the true dangers and the true horrors if, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood take power in the Middle East?
Astonishingly, I think that the answer is largely no. I do know that in the United States of America, what I call the secular liberal mindset is more fearful of Christianity than it is of Islam, astonishingly. But it is. And I think that the secular liberal mindset simply finds it impossible to imagine anybody profoundly impacted by faith. And they therefore draw a distinction between the faith of Islam and the practice of what they consider to be a few radicals on the fringe. But the notion that there is an entire population in Egypt that is actually very happy about the return of Islamic fundamentalism to the country, and that somehow these crowds in Tahrir Square were not people who actually wanted to go home and recreate the atmosphere of the Sorbonne or Cambridge University on the streets of Cairo, is baffling to them. That's not what they expected. And they still, you know, cognitive dissonance is a powerful psychological reality. None of us like confronting truths that are deeply uncomfortable to us. And for the West right now to confront the idea that they've been utterly and totally wrong, and that that there is a problem intrinsically with Islam, they're having trouble dealing with that, and that trouble is going to bring enormous and painful consequences in its wake.
I also want to discuss that whoever wins the presidential elections in November, whether it's Mitt Romney, the Republican candidate, or whether President Obama is re-elected for a second term, one of the major foreign policy issues that president will have to deal with, and this, I believe, is the most pressing foreign policy issue of our generation, and that is Iran acquiring nuclear weapons, knowing that Iran is a state sponsor of international terrorism. If they acquire nuclear weapons, it's a complete game changer in the Middle East, and that Israel may have to take military action to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Do you believe that that one event could trigger a third world war?
Well, you said earlier, and I agreed with you entirely when you spoke about this being a replay of the events of the mid-20th century. As we go back to the 1930s, when only a few lonely people, led by Winston Churchill, saw the peril of the rise of Nazism, everybody else was eager and happy to welcome Chamberlain back in 1938 with his silly peace in our time. Cowardice is a powerful, powerful tool of politics, Simon. And today, in the United States of America, there are many people who will do anything to preserve what they see as peace, which essentially is simply postponing a problem to a point where you're going to have to deal with it from a considerably less advantageous point of strategic positioning. So could it lead to anything massive? One doesn't even want to go there. The mind boggles at those thoughts. There is no question, though, that if Iran does get nuclear weapons, and it certainly seems to be on that track, it will be entirely due to the intransigence and cowardice of the current administration.
And also, I mean, this also worries me very greatly, is that if President Obama is re-elected, he then may, and I've also heard reports coming out of Israel that he's preparing to normalize relations with Iran. Instead of confronting Iran, normalizing relations, Israel would be even further isolated. And could we see the first time in Israeli-American relations where the president is directly at odds with Israel's foreign policy and strategic outlook on the Middle East that could cause serious, serious problems for America's standing in the world?
Well, another consequence of secular fundamentalism is the deep conviction that no values are ultimate, because everything is situational, everything is subjective. And so they truly do believe that, that if the Pope were to sit down with abortion activists, all they would need is a few cups of coffee to actually arrive at some agreement. They don't believe that there are any ultimate values. They certainly do not believe in the existence of incompatible values. They do believe that if a vegetarian sat down with a cannibal for long enough, they'd come to an agreement. It's incomprehensible to them that what would actually happen is that the cannibal would eat the vegetarian. And so here as well, there is an inability to deal with the fact that there are certain incompatible views that can only be reconciled by deciding, in the end of the day, which way is the way we're going to go. And in the 19th century, America faced that with slavery. It was perfectly clear that America could not be a nation which said, hey, let everyone do what they want. You know, some people can have slaves, some people won't have slaves, whatever you want. It's a land of freedom. There was an understanding that there were two mutually incompatible visions, and it did have to be resolved. And I think we're in that sort of situation right now again.
We're down to the last, I think, probably 7 or 8 minutes of the program, Rabbi. Do you have a message for our Christian viewers? Because I believe that at this time we're living in very precarious, very dangerous times, and the church and Christians really need to stand with Israel and the Jewish people at this time.
Well, if I could take the liberty of speaking, in fact, and accepting your invitation, I would say this. First of all, I would urge European and British Christians to stand proudly and fearlessly. If I may say, I think it is time to move your banner out of the church and into the village square. For the longest time, I think Christians have been trained to lie low for fear of, quote, offending anybody with their faith. But the truth is that the only people whom today it is open season on. The only people who can be offended with impunity in media and in entertainment are Christians. I do think it's time to adopt a little bit of Jewish, may I use the term chutzpah?
Absolutely, that's a very good Yiddish term there.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, I mean, you know, I understand turn the other cheek. That's not just a New Testament term. It appears in Scripture, in the Old Scripture as well. But I think it may be time for Christians to become just a little bit more vocal and to recognize that it may be that it is for a time like this that you are here, and that there is an opportunity to step onto the cultural battlefield and really save not just Christianity, save biblical civilization, and play a role in the defense of Israel as a part of that biblically based alliance. It's a very exciting time to be a Bible-believing Jew. It's a very exciting time to be a Bible-believing Christian. And it's a very exciting time to realize that we are joined by far more than we are separated. The theological incompatibilities are obvious and evident to all, but the biblical commonality, the role of Israel, the role of civilization, the role of, frankly, the biblically based role of a free market, all of these things are things that are ready for us to step forward and defend at a time when they are being besieged by the crooks and clowns and creeps and cranks of the world like never before.
And you're here on a speaking tour, aren't you? So you're here in the UK for a while. And
I'm here very specifically, yes, for a wonderfully exciting event called the Success Summit International that is taking place on November the 10th. And that's really why I came to the United Kingdom, because I believe so strongly that the biblical vision of individual financial autonomy, the idea that the Tower of Babel was not an appropriate model. The Tower of Babel, the idea of everybody dependent upon the centralized power structure. Those critical 9 verses in chapter 11 of Genesis describe a socialism which I believe can only be defeated by gifting people with the potential for individual financial independence. And I believe very much in the redemptive power of business and economic self-sufficiency. And it's really it's a passion, it's a ministry, and I'm very, very proud to be invited to be part of this summit, in which we essentially invite people from every walk of life, from every culture, from every background, to put everything aside and just realize that if you are able to increase your revenue, if you are able to make more money, that simply means that you have found new and better ways of serving God's other children. When you create wealth, it means you are doing things for other human beings. You are pleasing God's other children, and at the same time making yourself independent, putting yourself in a position to provide security for yourself and your family. It's exciting. It's something I'm deeply committed to, and it's something that I know is going to change the lives of hundreds and hundreds of people on this coming 10th of November.
Excellent. So we should have the details on the screen of, so let me get it here. So it's www.successsummitinternational.com. There we go, got it in front of the screen. I know we're also coming to the end of the interview, but what was been your reception of, I mean, you spoke, I believe, at the Hillsongs at the weekend. What has been the response of Christians to your message?
Well, you know, the very first time I ever spoke to a large group of Christians was a number of years ago, perhaps 15 or 18 years ago, at the invitation of Pat Robertson in the United States of America. And he'd gathered together a group of 6,000 Christians at a meeting in the Hilton in Washington, D.C., and he'd asked me to speak to the crowd. And here's what I said when I started off. I said, would you like to know what my great-grandfather in Europe would say if he knew I was in a room with 6,000 Christians? And everybody sat forward in their seats, and the room went absolutely quiet. And I said, "Run for your life!" That's what it would have been.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything is different today. And it's vitally important that we are all aware that if you try and drive your car with your eyes only on the rear view mirror, you're going to crash. There's a time when we have to stop looking at the past and start looking at a very exciting future unfolding as the road leads ahead to a bright sunshine vista. And today, Jewish-Christian relations is this extraordinary picture of promise and hope in the future. So my reception, it was humbling. I was made to feel so welcome, and I felt I made so many new friends, and frankly, I was uplifted. I truly was uplifted to see the vitality and the excitement at Hillsong Church. To me, that signaled enormous optimism for the future of the United Kingdom, economically, culturally, politically, and in every possible way. There was such a reservoir of vast faith and belief and optimism in the Dominion Theatre in London when I spoke at Hillsong. It was exciting. It was uplifting. I think they gave me far more than I gave them.
Superb. Rabbi, we're down to the last less than 3 minutes of the program left. Would you say that really that Jewish people, certainly with those practice Judaism, Christians as well, need we need a more of a muscular Christianity, a muscular form of Judaism as well, to really stem the tide of what I describe as militant secularism and also Islamic extremism, which we're seeing right across Europe, in order for Christians to have a voice, not only to defend Israel and the Jewish people, but also to defend our Judean Christian heritage? And how much is politics central to this key?
Politics, of course, is the vehicle, and I mean, you interview politicians frequently, I know. Politics is the vehicle. It's if you think about it, the best definition of politics for me is that politics is nothing other than the practical application of our most deeply held moral principles, and that's why I do believe, and I'm ready to step into line and stand shoulder to shoulder with you on this. You're 100% correct. Jews and Christians need to come out of the closet, lose their fearfulness, stop being intimidated by what you called militant secularism. You're right. Stop being intimidated by it. Get out and flex your political muscle like everybody else is doing, but let's do it more effectively than everybody else. We have the numbers, we have the commitment, we have the belief, and ultimately we have the biblical vision.
Okay, well, 30 seconds. If you've got a message for our viewers in 30 seconds, I'll give you the final say of the program.
Yes, I would say go and buy my book immediately. It's called Thou Shalt Prosper, and the 10 Commandments for Making Money. It's essentially the depiction of how Jews have prospered in good times and bad, in every generation, in every society, economically, and I've translated this vast body of information into data for people of every single culture. It's called Thou Shalt Prosper. Go for it.
Okay, Rabbi Daniel Lapin, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the Middle East Report
today. Thank you
today.
very much indeed, Simon. It's been an honor to be with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I just want to thank you for watching today's program. We've really learnt today, really, that our Judean Christian heritage is under threat due to the rise of militant secularism and Islamic extremism across Europe and across the Western world, which is leaving a political vacuum. And this is the time that Christians need to arise to stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters, to know that we're standing with them, to stand with Israel and defend our civilization, which is under threat. And if we don't defend it, who will? Which will only lead to a period of tyranny, anarchy, and fear. But we don't need to be fearful, because we have the Word of God. We have the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to look to. And this pays tribute to the country, which is a miracle, and that is the modern state of Israel in high definition.